So we're going to finish out the evening's activity by supporting UNAC, which is the United National Anti-War Coalition, which involves many groups, organizations, and they ask for groups across the country to help and participate in this week of action, the whole week. So this is the first day of it, I think, 16th to the 22nd. So if you have any ideas, have any more this week, feel free to do it. Put it up on their website and contribute to expanding the concept of not having war and not funding war. So this first event with Medea Benjamin was sponsored by the U.S. Peace Council's chapter here in Michigan, Michigan Peace Council, and the Ann Arbor Coalition Against War. This is a rally against war. I want to mention that lefties, or progressives, or whatever some of us call ourselves, or others call themselves, being a lefty, being a progressive, and being anti-war is not the same as sending weapons over to fight a war. If you support the government's attempts to stop the war in Ukraine by sending weapons over there, billions of dollars, then how can you call yourself a lefty? I mean, I don't doubt anybody here does that, but it's really the question of all times. We just asked that earlier when it was difficult to answer. Medea tried to answer, and the gentleman asked the question, now what exactly, who are our allies in the left? Who are anti-war? I mean, groups that used to be anti-war are now thinking they're defending anti-war positions by kicking Russia out of Ukraine. Well, sure, we don't want Russia there, but let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how they got there in the first place, and that's what Medea's book talks about, and we're very happy that she came here to talk. So, we talk a lot about imperialism, and I want to mention that our group put up signs here along the wall. They got blue tape on top of them, and I put them up during the talk. You saw some of them there. There's also a couple of very interesting lists of comments on the back wall by Caitlin Johnstone, who's one of my favorite writers online, about imperialism. And we focus on that in our series that we've been doing at Swords and the Plowshares. We're on our third part, and now we're going to go into the fourth part. And we're going to invite Veterans for Peace and a Palestinian group and CWL and one other group again. So look for that. That's coming up. The point here is to just try to expand our collection. We have to get as big as we can. I mean, as you said, you need 5% to do something. Well, we're not even close to that. And we used to have a massive anti-war movement. I just talked to my young friend over here, Cameron. I asked him, so how many anti-war marches were you in your life? You know, and he says, like, this might be the fourth or something like that. I mean, that's sad when you think about it. I mean, us older folks, we did that, what, almost every other weekend or something. I mean, how many against the war in Vietnam, starting with that? War in Korea. Anybody here protest the war in Korea? Okay, we're not that old. Okay.
8 years old.
To tell you the truth, I didn't learn about that war.
Modern war in Korea against the
Yeah, the modern war. I didn't learn much about the Korean War until I got older and got away from the propaganda shit that I was taught all my life when I was a kid, and learned a lot more about what happened in Korea. And even though a lot of my family, and some died, some gave their last service in Korea, what really happened was no different than Vietnam, was no different than U.S. expansion everywhere. That was the first big war, Cold War, military Cold War, militant. And a lot's to be learned about the Korean War. And there's now people writing about it from the other side of the story that we've never known about. So I just want to say that Karl Marx, some of us are Marxists, he said, seek truth from facts. And we're all here trying to seek truth. And where are you going to find facts? Is it on the internet? Is it, I mean, how can you tell what's true and what's a fact and what's not? We're being misled by so much propaganda that could be true, could not be true. So it's very tough times to get the truth. Not that it hadn't been in the past, but now it's much more difficult. But as we see, as a lot of the websites that I've been going to and journals and stuff, I think the West is losing allies as the new world order is being formed. There's a creation of a multipolar world as defined by China. It's a totally different approach to living together in the world, and that's, I feel, I've learned in my life, the biggest challenge is to learn how to live with people you don't agree with, to somehow because we're not ever going to all agree on everything. So how can you learn to live with someone you don't agree with and not kill each other and not have wars and stuff like that? You can't convince them how you think. They can't convince you, whatever. How do you get past that? How do you live so that we don't blow up the world eventually? So BRICS coalition, there's many coalitions being formed now, SEO, many are challenging NATO and the West, and I think there's tremendous advance going on in the world. The problems with the economy, with the dollar, with the U.S. hegemony in the world for the dollar is starting to weaken for sure. And once this powerful force gets knocked down a little bit so that they act like they better live with the rest of the people in the world more fairly, then we'll all be better off. So whether we're left or right, this is no longer important in the world. Political alignment of forces. It's sovereignty that matters most now. Because, we used to think it was anti-communist, but Russia's not a communist country. What's going on here? Why is the U.S. going after Russia? Do they think they want to restart? They keep saying they want to restart the Soviet Union or whatever. You have to create an enemy, and Goebbels was a great exemplifier of that. The propaganda of trying to create the bigger the enemy, the more money you can spend on weapons, and the more you can fight wars. And that's how you expand capitalism, how you expand the empire, make money for arms manufacturers. It's all a big money capitalist game that we have to catch on to eventually. And all you guys are here because you know all this stuff already, so I'm going to stop talking because I think we all are on the same page here. But if we're not, that's all right, because just the fact that we're sitting here wanting to listen to each other, that's a great thing. So I'm going to turn the mic over to our friends who want to give us their positions. And I don't know, did I talk more than 5 minutes? I was going to try to keep it to 5 minutes if you can, and so that everybody who wants to speak gets a chance. And then if we run out of speakers, then you come back. Okay. So let's just start with. We'll start with youth first. We're going to bring up our young guy first, and then we'll bring up a little older gentleman. Now, line up according to looks. Okay, that's it. So, all right. So first, we got this young guy here who's with CPUSA, and how exciting to see what's happening in the CPUSA. I don't know if many of you know the political challenges that have gone on in the left. CPUSA communists have been fought against so long. I mean, this is the strongest anti-communist country in the world. So, I mean, to be a communist in the U.S. is probably the most difficult. Although they're not killing them as much as they kill communists in other countries. But it's very difficult. And in the left, CPUSA was isolated, marginalized for a long time. And now look at it's growing. There's young people in it. It's very exciting. Whatever young people get involved in like this is very exciting. So here's one of the best examples of it. And I'm going to turn over to Cameron Harrison to speak.
Thank you. So I'm going to be real brief, but I can start off by saying we're witnessing a great danger facing humanity, with the talks of nuclear war seeming like more and more of a reality. Capitalism in its quest for markets and greater profits will continue to produce antagonisms between nations and people, or what the ruling class calls free competition. And as we know, war is simply competition solved by other means. We're witnessing our government continue to fund and subsidize a right-wing coup-orchestrated government in Ukraine with funds that are desperately needed here at home in Detroit in order for the ruling class to continue their proxy war against Russia. Billions and billions are sent almost monthly, yet the people of Flint, Michigan still haven't gotten justice for the capitalist orchestrated water crisis. And just recently, the United States and their allies in the United Nations are considering sending troops to Haiti, and this we must reject. We're witnessing the Banderite neo-Nazi Azov battalion being welcomed into our nation's capital with open arms, while they freely lobby for the U.S. to use our tax dollars to fund their ethno-nationalist campaign in the Donbass region, all under the auspices of fighting Russia. It seems like our well-hearted liberal friends have forgotten the atrocities taking place in that region and the fact that Africans within Ukraine were left in the dust after the initial invasion so that the pure-blooded Ukrainians could escape safely first. U.S. imperialism is gearing up for years, potentially decades, of confrontation with China and angling to keep Russia in a weakened position. The only way to confront this all-out assault by U.S. imperialism is with working-class internationalism. For us, here in the United States, embracing the broadest tactics and building the broadest movement is necessary to wage an effective fight back against our ruling class of war profiteers, bond makers, and the finance capitalist monopolies that make everything function. The only way to defeat capitalism is with socialism. And our friend Jerry brought up today that the squad has been virtually silent on the war. So I say we call them the bomb squad until they start to oppose the war and oppose the funding. So if you hear us, Rashida Tlaib, you are the bomb squad.
I love that.
So rebuilding the American peace movement is of the utmost importance to our collective struggle, and I just want to thank the Michigan Peace Council for having us, Code Pink and Medea Benjamin, the Baker family and the General Baker Institute, Moratorium Now, and UNAC for this event. Thank you.
So here's Russ Bellant, who's an expert on the Ukrainian situation and the Nazi situation after World War II and all. He's done a lot of research, written books and all that stuff, if you don't know that. But Russ Bellant.
Thanks, Bill, Michigan Peace Council, General Baker Institute, and all comrades in the struggle. This story, like all tragedies, have long histories. And this really goes back to World War II. To understand what's going on in Ukraine, you have to know that the Ukrainian Nazis are not in an opportunistic relationship, but have been were recruited after World War II by what became the CIA to become assets in covert operations on the Eastern Front. Not just the Ukrainian Nazis, the Hungarian Arrow Cross, the Bulgarian Legion, the Croatian Ustashi, etc., 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 the Slovak Nazis, the Hlinka Guard, and so forth. And this whole entire mass the entire mass was recruited and operated under an umbrella that was led by the Ukrainian Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the Banderist group. And the reason that continues to be relevant is that those forces were amplified and strengthened through U.S. assets and U.S. funding. And I know this in a number of ways, but I'll just give you one example. In the mid-1980s, the Reagan administration was organizing proxy wars like we're seeing in Ukraine across the world. In Nicaragua, Angola, Mozambique, and many other places on the planet. And I was in the meetings with the leadership of all of them. And I could see the blueprint for 1 million deaths. And I went to those meetings for several years. I met with the Ukrainian Nazis. We had follow-up meetings. We talked about the covert operations they were involved in. I got it firsthand. Some of that leadership was out of Detroit. But the people who were the international leaders, the Stetskos, were there. And when the government, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Ukrainian nationalists, with U.S. support, began playing a significant role in Ukraine. I'm talking in the early 90s. To give an example, they got a change adopted in Ukraine to start giving pensions to the World War II SS Division, which was a Ukrainian division, to the veterans of the UPA, which was a paramilitary force of the Nazis that did mass exterminations across Ukraine. I have a book with me if you want to see an example. but in just the Polish areas of Galicia and Wolin, they eliminated over 100,000 Polish residents to the point where they didn't just kill the people, they eliminated all the evidence of their existence, their farms, their silos, their orchards, their cattle. They were complete, and the definition of what they were doing then is the definition of what it means to be a Nazi in Ukraine today. They wanted a country that was Ukrainian only, no other group to be part of it. They organized battalions when the Operation Barbarossa on June 30th, 1941, when the Nazis went into Ukraine, there were 2 Ukrainian battalions that went in with them, organized by the Ukrainian nationalists. And they started to enhance their favor. They started rounding up the Jews of Lviv and other cities and just doing massive exterminations, like immediately. 1.5 million people died from that alone. With, of course, help from the German army, but they didn't need German help to do it. And a quick question.
What year was that?
1941.
Wow.
1941, and it continued through 44. This is so important in Ukrainian history that the Azov Battalion, which was formed in 2014 from the Ukrainian nationalist Banderas, adopted as their patch, their shoulder patch, the Das Reich SS Panzer, 2nd Panzer Division of World War II, because that was Hitler's main military force that went in the Ukraine. And it was the Ukrainian Nazis' best hope for taking power there, and they still honor it to this day. During the interim, the Ukrainian Nazis formed political parties, right sector, and other various formations. It gets too complicated to quickly discuss, but they continue to exercise power through paramilitary means as well as political parties. So when the United States had a dispute with the elected Ukrainian government in 2013, they employed the Ukrainian Nazis to challenge the government and eventually to overthrow it. The New York Times, December 17th, 2013, described the demonstrations as saying that the street muscle of these demonstrations were the Ukrainian Nazis. And described something of their background, not enough. And so they were operating under complete direction of the U.S. Embassy, and Victoria Nuland, who was Biden's Assistant Secretary of State and helping to run the operations in Ukraine, was then the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs under Hillary Clinton and President Obama. And she went out to the demonstrators and fed them cookies and did everything to visibly show the United States was fully behind these forces. And they pulled the trigger when the president of Ukraine said had been seeking help from both the European Union or the Russia for the economic assistance in their country. And the European Union responded by sending about an 1,100-page document explaining how the Ukrainian economy has to be integrated into the European Union. But they didn't offer much money. The president of Ukraine says, we're not looking for you to take over our economy, we're looking for financial assistance. And Russia offered them $15 billion. They said, well, Russia's offering us what we're asking for, you're trying to take over us, we're going with Russia. And the White House told them, no, you're not. You're going to go with the European Union. And so when these demonstrations were organized, they were around pro-European Union demonstrations. And the European Union got involved in trying to negotiate something peaceful between the existing elected government and the street demonstrators. And they were coming toward peace, and they'd come up with a tentative agreement where the president was eventually going to step down and there'd be new elections. And then all of a sudden, teams of snipers showed up and started shooting at the police and at the demonstrators. And the crowd thought the government was doing it, even though the government wouldn't shoot the police. And that helped escalate, and they overthrew, and they took over the presidential palace and drove everybody out and so forth. The famous quote that Medea had in her video was where Victoria Nuland had said, "F the EU." That's when she was saying it. She wanted to stop the EU from interfering in what the United States was planning to do to overthrow the government. And they were successful. To this day, nobody has fully documented who those snipers were, but it is believed that some of them have been pretty well documented to come out of a building that was that was controlled by the Ukrainian Nazis. NATO also has something called Gladio. They have secret underground armies that have recently been exposed in every country. And some of them were thought to be Gladio operatives as well. There's a book called NATO's Secret Armies, if you're interested in that subject. The documentation on all of the recruitment of the Nazi forces and who they were and what their history was put together in a very powerful book called Blowback by Professor Christopher Simpson. And it's based all on government documents, interviews with the people who were doing it, interviews with the people who were recruited. It puts the whole story together on the whole post-war recruitment of Nazis, including German Nazis who were part of the Holocaust and were the engineers of the Holocaust. It's a brutal history. NATO was basically a Nazi construct. And the U.S. is controlling everything. All the political parties that are anywhere more progressive and anywhere to the left of Zelensky have been banned, and political leaders are being murdered. Of these parties are being murdered in Ukraine. The only parties that exist are to the right, the more fascist political parties. The U.S., when Zelensky got elected, he said he was going to be the peace candidate, and I'll close this up. He was going to be the peace candidate. One of the first things he did is he went to the Eastern republics and told the Azov Nazis to get out. And they said, "No, you get out if you don't want to be hung from a street from a street lamp. You get out. We are not taking orders from you," because they were taking their orders from the United States. We are the authors of this crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Russ Bellant. So we're going to have a special event someday where we can have Russ expand on this subject for sure, and maybe have a couple experts join him, and we'll just do it. We got to do it soon. So
And I'll bring some more written material.
yes, we'll be have a program rather than impromptu here. So everyone, you all know Jerry Goldberg. Let's welcome Jerry.
Talk for a couple minutes. One is, it was interesting, Bill Ray's career, and it got me thinking, I remember in the 70s, one of the times when the U.S. was threatening the annihilation of North Korea, we held a small demonstration, about 20, 25 people, in front of Hudson's downtown in solidarity with North Korea. And a week or two later, we got a copy of the Pyongyang News, the newspaper of the North Koreans, and that picture was on the front page of the Pyongyang News. And it showed the importance, even small anti-war actions are significant, because they are what hold together the movement, and they're watched by the world many times, especially when we're in the imperialist center. Today is an important event because it's not only our days of protest, but it's the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And you can believe over the next few days we're going to see all sorts of slanders against China. And of course, in the recent Pentagon document that was published last year, China was really the main focus of U.S. Target for U.S. aggression. And in many ways, when I see the conflict going on now, I see it really as part of a global struggle, where the U.S. sees an alliance between China and Russia that affords an alternative to the complete domination of U.S. imperialism, which they thought they had achieved in light of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what that means is that developing nations don't have to go to U.S. imperialism, don't have to go to U.S. corporations who only will give aid on the condition that they dominate their economies. It gives some room for them to develop. And that's what they despise, and that's what they can't stand on, and that's what they want to reverse. A few months ago, I remember seeing a report on NBC News where they actually invoked the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was about Latin America. And they talked about how China and Russia were invading Latin America, not with weapons, but with economic aid, and showed the various countries getting economic aid. And then they brought up the Cuban Missile Crisis as if to send the message that if this aid continues, this is what we have in store. So let's keep in mind that this is part of a global struggle. That's how we have to view it. It's not in isolation. That's why most countries, most oppressed countries worldwide, developing countries, have at least abstained and have refused to come out in support of the U.S. in their attacks on Russia under great pressure, because they know where their solidarity is going to come from. And that's why we need to be strong in our opposition to U.S. imperialism wherever it raises its head, whether it's in the Ukraine, whether it's against China, and solidarity with Cuba, and solidarity with all people that are standing up so we can create, as Cameron said so well, a new world, a socialist world, where people's needs and human needs come ahead and profit is put on the dustbin of history. Thank you.
The dustbin of history.
Let me just end by saying I want to thank Michigan Peace Council and the Ann Arbor Committee Against the War for their efforts putting this tour together. And a special thanks to Medea for what I thought was a wonderful presentation and expressing and for confronting the warmongers everywhere she goes for so many years. Something that we may not all agree ideologically, as she said, but we certainly appreciate a fighter in the struggle.
I second that. I agree. And I want to.
All right, thank you everybody for being here. I want to elaborate a little bit on what Cameron said about our long-suffering brothers and sisters in Haiti. And this week, Canadian military supply planes touched down in advance of a United States and Canadian joint military invasion of that country. This is not the first time the United States has been militarily involved in Haiti. We've been involved since the brave people of Haiti declared their independence from France, declared the end of slavery, and declared black liberation and black self-determination. The United States, a nation founded on racism, on genocide and slavery, cannot allow that to happen. Global capitalism that shares those same roots cannot allow that to happen. So since day one, we have done everything we can to consign Haiti and their revolution to the dustbin of history. And that started with France demanding reparations for every single person who had the audacity to free themselves, supported by the United States. And that's sickening, and that's continued throughout the decades with the invasion of the United States Marines in '93 and the overthrow of President Aristide in 2007, when he had the audacity to raise the minimum wage for textile workers from 20 cents an hour to 60 cents an hour. And he was deposed from power, a right-wing goon was put in his place, and he was brought back by the United States a few years later to take the blame. Last year, Jovenel Moïse, the president of Haiti, was assassinated in under unclear circumstances, but there has been some indication the CIA provided assistance. And since then, the people of Haiti have been in the streets. They've been pissed off that their sovereignty has been continually trampled, that their human rights have been continually ignored, and that they have been treated as this factory, as this warehouse, as just this, this place of continued degradation. And so the brave Haitian people have been in the streets continuously for more than a year since this assassination. And the movement in the streets that we hope to build today is reaching the point where it could actually meaningfully take power and meaningfully give power to human beings and not to the imperialist dogs and capitalists that the United States wants to see at the helm of Haiti. So I just want to say, hands off Haiti, solidarity with the Haitian people, and long live the Haitian Revolution.
Wow, that was well spoken. Thank you, Rudy. A young guy and focusing on a very important issue. Haiti, I don't know if you folks are all aware of the Black Alliance for Peace, of course, BAP, which is Adjama Baraka. Adjama Baraka is on our board of the U.S. Peace Council. Yes, and so is Gerald Horn, and so is Margaret Flowers, and so is many other great people on the U.S. Peace Council board. And so, I mean, that's the group I think you should all be part of. And he definitely is focusing on Haiti in his writings, Jama Baraka. I mean, so many things going on in the world, in different parts of the world, where the U.S. is starting a fire here, starting a fire there, killing people there. Do you see the slide that we had up here during the program that showed how many people have died because of U.S. wars over the last, since 2001 even? I mean, millions. Because we don't even see that. As Americans, we don't think about that part. We might here in this room, so we just got to spread the word.
First, I want to thank the organizers for today's event, and also the General Baker Institute for holding this space for everyone today. I didn't really organize my thoughts too much just sitting in the chair, but I wanted to connect the dots to the occupying military force that the police is in the United States. It was the anniversary yesterday of the founding of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And I guess I just wanted to make the connection between imperialism abroad, U.S. imperialism abroad, and also U.S. Terrorism on its own people, whether they're citizens or undocumented or poor, black, brown, indigenous, ever going since the colonizers came hundreds of years ago. Yeah. There's all kinds of situations that come up in our lives personally and we hear of where it's like, what do we do? You know, someone's having a mental health crisis and everyone around them sees it and the person themselves doesn't realize they're in it. And sometimes people, family members or support get to the point where it's like, you know, who do we call? And so many people who have no other choice, they feel or seem, than to call the police. And that often ends up with the police killing someone in a mental health struggle. Recently, I think 2 people were killed by Detroit police, and they were in obvious mental health struggle. So I guess all of this to say that yes, you know, no to war, no to U.S. imperialism, and also yes to creating alternatives to the police in the United States, yes to creating resources and services, people-powered, and you know, there's so many fires to put out. And it's one bite of the apple at a time. So all power to the people.
Thank you, sir. Come on, Joy.
It's Bierlein. Yeah, Bierlein. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. As others have said, thank you to the organizers of this event. Thank you to the organizers of the event, as others have said, and to the General Baker Institute for hosting this. I think it was, I can't remember exactly, maybe it was Cameron who said that the struggle against imperialism has to happen alongside the struggle for socialism in the United States. And there's a lot of different approaches to how to make that happen. And well, I'm gonna peddle an organization here. The Detroit Tenants Association is a recent organization that has come out of it's coming out of a couple of tenants associations in Detroit, and it's led and organized by Detroiters, longtime Detroiters. And the aim of this movement is to secure political and economic power for tenants here. And this is one avenue that we can struggle for socialism. And as progressive people, I think we have a duty to ally ourselves with these movements, and if we are tenants, to be a part of them and address our own struggles within them. So I just want to put that out there. They have an Instagram and a Twitter, and there's going to be a couple of events coming up in the near future. I don't think they're scheduled yet, but I just wanted to put that out there. So please follow them, and when you see their events, please come out. Really good people in this organization, really progressive people, and they got a lot of momentum, and I think something really serious can come out of this. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I hope that was appropriate.
Joey Bierlein. Thank you. So does anyone else want to speak? Okay, Ken Parks, my old buddy. At least you don't have to turn the mic up for you.
The hard of hearing speak loud to begin with, because when you struggle to hear and you miss a lot, when you speak, you want everybody to hear you. So that's one of my disabilities. I've got several. My sister sat me down and told me I had ADD, which means my mind is going on everywhere at rapid speed. I can spin off. We had a good conversation, and I said, well, I appreciate you, but I think I have ADO. And they looked at me like, ADO? I knew what I was saying. Attention of a different order. So when you gather a lot of dots, when you're trying to make the relationship between the dots make sense, it's a struggle for me just to do that and not to go get more dots, because there's an endless amount of dots. So we got to start with our breath. And one of my favorite people is Dr. Aradhani, who's the Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi of Sri Lanka, that founded Sarvodaya Shramadana, the awakening of all through shared resources. So let's take a breath and think of the awakening of all through shared resources. They start all of their meetings with meditation and prayer. As indigenous people start every event with smudging, everything is a kind of ceremony. It's Standing Rock. The day began at 7 o'clock when the elders called on their wonderful PA system, got us out of our tents. Michigan camp had about 4 or 5 tents. And we go listen to the elders speak, smudging. And then we would go to the front lines on the Cannonball River for water ceremony on the front line. Whenever you engage in the struggle, it's a kind of ceremony. You take a breath, you get your mind and heart clear, you focus on what you're going to do. All of the ancestors are with us. We've got a lot to learn about healing ourselves and healing the world inseparably. So like right now, I just had my 80th birthday, and I have to regain, every day, I have to regain the ability to squat, or I'm in big trouble with my hips, with my knees, with my shoulder. Healing ourselves, healing the world. We've got to help each other heal. And then, inseparably from that, in the interrelatedness to our own healing, heal the world, because we're all full of chemicals and stuff that we can begin to clean up. So the environmental movement is beginning maybe to understand that the war machine is the biggest destroyer of the environment. And Kathy Graham is exactly right. We need to do productive work and not wasteful work. The military machine is wasteful work. And I think more and more people are ready to hear that. So tomorrow morning, this is an auspicious moment for all of us that participated in any way with this wonderful event. And tomorrow morning is another auspicious morning. How do we look at our daily situation and look at the interrelatedness of that with this and with the war? You know, I spent 2.5 years in Germany. I know how this is Deutschsprachen ich spreche kein Hitler. I had the same accent as Adolf Hitler. I didn't know that until somebody said, Ken, when you speak German, it sounds like Hitler. I said, what? He was a fluent German speaker who was able to use the energies of that language in a tribal way. But there are internationalist Germans, and I worked with them, veterans of resistance to fascism. They more or less taught me the better fascists than Hitler won World War II. The struggle is still on. My first peace demonstration was with them in Germany. And if you read Reinhard Gehlen's autobiography, Hitler's chief of intelligence on the Eastern Front, all the way to Ukraine, the whole Eastern Front, all the collaborators, he had the paperwork. He put barrel, buried it. By 42, they had figured out Hitler's messing up the experiment. He's one of the better fascists than Hitler. He turned himself into He buried all the information, all the paperwork, all the collaborators, surrendered to U.S. intelligence and said, we know who the real enemy is. This is the day after World War II. He turns himself in, a big war criminal. We know who the real enemy is. And of course, the PFCs had to pass him up. They didn't know what he was talking about. At some point in the chain of command, yes, General Galen, we know who the real enemy is, and you're hired. He helped set up the Cold War, helped set up NATO. So Russ commented, I'm glad you mentioned the Polar Bear Brigade, because the context of this struggle goes back generations. 1525, it was called the German Peasants' War. It was really the revolution of 1525. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Paris Commune, the Bolshevik Revolution, in which Winston, that's the Polar Bear Brigade, was sent by U.S. and British troops. You're not coming home from World War I, you're going to go to the Civil War in Russia. So NATO came out of that kind of context. It's not to defend anybody from Russia, it's to overthrow anything that imposes the investors. The investors love war, and this war partly is to keep China and Russia out of Africa, because they invest in infrastructure which is going to mess up with U.S. investment to take the resources. So right now, weapons and aid and money are going to the Tigray Liberation Front in Ethiopia. We're in part of a civil war right now, and we need to pay some attention to that, what's going on in Africa. So it is everything interrelated. As we heal ourselves, we'll be able to go tomorrow morning and engage in our everyday life with the same kind of understanding and enthusiasm and commitment that we have at this moment of this event. Thank you so much. La lucha sigue.
Are you familiar, speaking of Cuba, are you familiar with the films of Santiago Alvarez?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we're trying to put together a screening of some of the Santiago Alvarez films that I have a disc of. They're fantastic. I just wanted to mention that. I knew you would know about it. Okay.
No, so Catherine doesn't want to plug her own son, but her son Travis Wilkerson is one of my favorite filmmakers. Do you know anything about Travis Wilkerson? Check him out, because she's telling me the story about Alvarez, one of the most iconic Cuban filmmakers. He was one of those, what do you call it, a direct cinema, where he made hundreds of films, documentaries about real life things happening and turning them into newsreels, they were called that. And her son went to Cuba to do a movie, a documentary about him. And he had this tremendous interview with Santiago. And then he got home, I think, and went to look at the film and discovered the whole, maybe through the X-ray machine and then whatever, it got all ruined. The video that he took got all ruined. The interview got jagged, no lines, couldn't hear the words. And he was stuck without this interview. But he made the movie anyways. And he made a really creative movie that totally showed how powerful and wonderful Santiago Alvarez is. What's the name of that movie?
I'm sorry?
You know the name of that movie?
Well, I wasn't plugging his film. He was accelerated under development.
That's it.
But I just think that the films of Santiago really get to the point of what you're saying about what a wonderful country it is. And I just want to say something that when you talk about the polar bears, I don't think most people know what you're talking about. But there was this expedition of 5,000 soldiers at the end of World War I that were sent to fight the Bolsheviks in Russia after the war was over. And what most people don't know is that a significant proportion of them refused to fight the Bolsheviks. They said that they're not our enemies. And it's an amazing story, but you won't read about that in any of the stuff that's out there. I've been to the Whitechapel Cemetery and seen, have you been there to the memorial? Yeah. It's an awesome place to go. It's amazing. So I just wanted to say that.
I-75, 14 mile, right?
I don't remember.
Yes, and she doesn't want to plug her son's stuff, but I mean, you really should check his work out. He also did An Injury to One, which is a very progressive political film. Go on YouTube and check out his films, because he's, like Santiago Alvarez, a progressive, very rare films of really progressive content. Cheryl Labash has been to Cuba many times, and she's been in the struggle for a long time. And I'm glad you chose to come up and say something. Hi, Cheryl.
I hadn't planned on speaking. I planned on listening and reacquainting myself with the Detroit community because I travel a lot. But since Cuba came up, I thought I really had to say something. And that's about what's happening in Cuba right now. There is a tremendous war being waged. Now, many of us who are my generation, we're familiar with the war on Cuba, and it's just, okay, the war on Cuba, the war on Cuba, the war on Cuba. But on April 6th, 1960, there was a State Department memo from some guy named Mallory to some guy named Rubottom, and it was approved by the State Department, and it said then that as inconspicuously as possible to deny food, employment, economic well-being to the Cuban people, because the revolution had so much support, they couldn't figure out how to overturn it otherwise. So since April 6, 1960, the United States has been working and working and working to undermine the revolution, to starve the revolution, to now in the digital age, to beam all kinds of outright lies about what's happening in Cuba, to try to persuade people to demonstrate against the government. All of this is going on, paid for with our tax dollars. Many people thought because Obama went to Cuba that the blockade was over. The blockade is not over. Not only is it not over, but Trump put in 243 really laser-aimed measures against Cuba to deny any little way of Cuba to circumvent the blockade. Then combined with that was the pandemic, where their major source of international funds was tourism. And of course, to protect the world, everything shut down, and it was true in Cuba as well. Some of the crimes that are being done against Cuba we need to know about, and people don't hear about it. Did you know that Cuba tried to buy ventilators and the contract was canceled? That when Cuba didn't have oxygen, they couldn't buy oxygen because of the blockade. Cuba developed 5 vaccines. They said, well, why would Cuba not depend on Moderna and Pfizer, you know? Because, the majority of the world can't afford the prices charged by the pharmaceutical giants, the capitalist control over pharmaceuticals. So Cuba made its own vaccines, good vaccines. I was working on an article today, and I happened to look up the statistics, right? Vaccination statistics. The highest vaccination rate in the whole world is Cuba.
Oh, that's right.
Is Cuba. And I compared it with Haiti. Cuba, 95% vaccination, Haiti, 3%.
Oh.
3%. And what the United States is trying to do is destroy the revolution because it shows there's another way. There's another way to organize society. There's another way to provide human needs instead of profit. So really, we need everyone to help end the blockade. We have an opportunity to, where Cuba's going to be in the news coming up. November 2nd and 3rd, there is going to be a vote at the United Nations. The first time this happened was 30 years ago in 1992. Cuba has introduced a resolution every year for 30 years calling on the U.S. to end the blockade. The economic, financial, and commercial embargo blockade of Cuba. And every year since 1992, that resolution has passed. And in fact, it has passed lately completely overwhelmingly. The only countries who vote no are the United States and Israel.
Wow.
Occasionally there will be a few other that come and go under pressure. So November 2nd and 3rd, there are going to be these votes at the United Nations. Countries will get up and speak about what the Cuban Revolution means to them, about why they're opposed to the blockade, which affects not just Cuba, it affects the whole world. It was just revealed that, there are countries like England and some other European countries that don't need to get visas to come to the United States. They have something called ESTA, and it's less expensive and it's quicker. So you don't have to go through the process of going to a US consulate and getting this. Well, because they have put Cuba back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, if you are from, say, Scotland, and you want to come to the United States and you apply for ESTA, guess what? You can't get it if you went to Cuba. That's how insidious and detailed this blockade is. And it affects other countries. DHL used to do deliveries in Austria to the Cuban embassy. Well, they couldn't do it anymore.
Can I say one thing about
Yeah.
that? Because I'm an RN. Cuba offered to bring doctors here and help us, and we needed help because we were really making a mess of this. And they just said no. They said no to the doctors to come here.
Right.
No, to help out with the pandemic.
No, Cuba didn't say no, but the United States said no.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is a memorandum of understanding between Cuba and the United States for medical help. And other states are working on it. There's tremendous potential right here. We have graduates of the Latin American School of Medicine who are in residency here. There are some that are beginning to work in the community, and they're debt-free doctors. But anyway, it's a lot. There are demonstrations actually happening. There's one in New York, one in Los Angeles, there's a press conference, there's one in Washington, D.C., there's one in Minneapolis. So people are using this time to find public ways to speak out about Cuba. And if anybody is interested in doing that here, please see me. Let's figure out some way of being Cuban Americans. This is something else. My friend Felix was born in Cuba and raised in Detroit. There are many Cuban Americans that are coming out against the blockade. And in fact, it's happening in Miami. Wow. Every month for more than 2 years. I hate to be I have so much news to tell, I'm sorry. Every last Sunday for more than 2 years now, they have done public bike and car caravans in the streets of Miami. They go down Calle Ocho, which is the, like right down the middle of the Cuban Miami thoroughfare. They do this every month, and it gets bigger, and they've had to fight off politically, people who've tried to disrupt it, but they have been successful, and they are going to be leading a march in New York City on the 29th of September, which is right before the United Nations vote calling on the blockade to end.
29th of what month?
I'm sorry, 29th of October.
Thank you.
That's better.
It's better.
So, it's, like I said, I hadn't planned on speaking, but because Cuba came up, these are really critical times, and we need to do more if we can.
Very good.
Puentes de Amor.
Yes, Puentes de Amor, building bridges of love. Carlos Lazo, who biked across the United States, he lives in Seattle. He biked to Washington. Medea and I met him there, and Medea danced in the park outside the train station during COVID. And it's been a really important thing that they have broken the Marco Rubio's hold on the narrative. Cuban Americans are speaking out against the blockade because it hurts Cuban families.
That's right.
Thank you, Cheryl Labash. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to close it out because we've extended our welcome here. We can't keep these people here all night. They're letting us use their place. We thank you all for being part of this, and you know how important each one of you are because there's few of us. We have to expand, so you are the power that can expand. Medea Benjamin is the person who got us all here today, and we want to give another nice round of applause to Medea, who's right here. Thank you so much for sticking around being with us. We love the work that you do. I wish we had more Medea Benjamins. Wow. How much can one person do? That's amazing. Keep up the great work. And the Code Pink is a wonderful group. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good night.